I'm really excited for today's video because I found a real golden nugget for you. Just look at this. So, in the standard chess opening, we initially play bishop b5, kind of like the Ruy Lopez opening, but not really. Here they play a6, so far so good, the main line, but now we deviate, and instead of castling, which is the main line, we play knight c3. Kind of moving it back to the classical, like very standard chess opening. Now, at this point, since you're defending this pawn, they start worrying about their own pawn, because you can trade off the knight and get it, so they play b5 usually. Now you play bishop to b3. And in this position, the most played move, we're still following the main line, most common moves, is bishop c5. And fundamentally, it's quite similar to the Italian game, right? If we were to move this pawn back to b7, it would be like very standard setup, right? That amateur players play all the time. But somehow, having this pawn on b5 changes things a lot, and we've got an evil trap that you can use against beginners and against Magnus Carlsen, and it's gonna work in both cases. So you play pawn a4, undermining this pawn, and you threaten to capture it. Now, also, there's this pin, you attack it, therefore, definitely they gotta do something about it. And in the vast majority of the cases, they're gonna push forward. Now, your knight goes to d5, and here's the evil trap. In most cases, your opponent is gonna notice that this pawn is no longer defended, since your knight left away, and they can take it, plus attack this pawn on f2. And having said all that, that is a losing error for black. But there is no way on earth your opponent can figure it out. It's just so advanced and so complicated that, like, even a GM could easily fall into this trap. Now, here's what you do. And by the way, this is a really solid and good opening to play, objectively. So even if your opponent doesn't fall for the trap or play anything else, you're perfectly fine. It's still a good opening, right? But in most cases, they will fall for the trap. Now, you play d4, another sudden surprise for your opponent. What does it do? Well, it opens up this bishop with a tempo, and there is also one more idea which we're going to see in a moment. Now, of course, we're hitting the bishop, hitting this pawn, therefore your opponent is going to take this pawn on d4 somehow. They're going to take it with a pawn, a bishop, or a knight. We're going to talk about all three. Let's say they take it with the knight. Then you trade off this knight from f3, and that's another reason behind you sacrificing the pawn. You want to trade off this knight. And as soon as this happens, it allows you to play queen g4. Previously, this move was not possible due to your knight on f3 obstructing this move, but now you can play there. And from here, we attack this knight, and we attack this pawn on g7, and black can defend both of them. However, at this point, your opponent will still be under the illusion that things are still moving on pretty well for them. They've grabbed one of your pawns on e4, then they've grabbed the second pawn on d4, and now they can grab the third pawn on f2, either with a knight or a bishop, so they still think that life's good. For instance, knight f2 grabs the third pawn as well as forks your queen and rook. But now you take queen takes g7, and all of a sudden queen takes h8 is actually a checkmating one threat. Notice that our knight takes away the square. Therefore, your opponent goes rook f8. And now, you go bishop h6, threatening queen takes f8 checkmate. There is no defense, and there is going to be a minute of silence for your opponent. Or when your opponent is going to stop making moves for a minute, we'll sit down and we'll try to contemplate, like, what the heck has just happened? A life felt so good just 2 moves ago, and now it's all over. In this position, your opponent also could take on f2 with their bishop, checking your king, which also looks very great for black, right? At first. But you play king e2, and this position is also a lot of fun for you. You still attack this knight as well as this pawn on g7, but now this bishop on f2 is also somewhat handy. All in all, your opponent may decide to castle because queen takes g7 is still quite annoying, but after that, you don't need to take right away. There is another in-between move which is very strong, it's bishop to h6. We capitalize on the pin, and we threaten queen takes g7 checkmate, which forces your opponent to lose time and play pawn g6 and weaken their king and expose this diagonal. And only now we can grab this knight on e4, and we already won a piece, plus this bishop on f2 is hanging, this rook on f8 is hanging, and the king is exposed, like, black is completely lost. There is also one funny line which I can show you in this position. You don't have to remember it, basically you have already won the game. There are so many ways for you to continue your attack from here. But let's say your opponent wants to drop the bishop back from here, from f2. Again, there are many ways for you to attack here and to win. But one of them, the most straightforward, is queen takes e5, just aiming for the checkmating one. And it also sets it up for knight f6 check, which makes it impossible for black to defend, really. Because whatever they do, rook e8 or f6, you still are going to play knight f6. For instance, if they play f6, you still play knight takes f6. And it not only it's a check, but it's also a discover check. Therefore, the king has to go. And at this point, well, actually, let this be a puzzle of the day. It's checkmate in 3. And if you can find it out, please write it down in the comments below. Again, you can find lots of wins here, but I need a checkmate in 3 moves. Alright, that covers knight takes d4. What if they instead take there by the bishop? Well, guess what? Nothing really changes, it's all the same. We still trade off the knight, and we then continue with queen g4, still hitting this knight and this pawn, so basically it's all the same. In this position, the most played move by black was knight takes b3. I think that whenever you attack your opponent, somehow intuitively they wish to trade off some pieces because it feels more secure and it feels simpler to play after that. But we don't have to take either of the knights. You can play queen takes g7 because it's stronger. You threaten to grab the rook with checkmating 1. And after rook to f8, there's going to be queen takes e5 and another minute of silence for your opponent when he still will desperately try to comprehend what has just happened and how could it happen that he lost the game so quickly. Alright, the third and the final option for black would be to take here with a pawn. It's actually a more stubborn option, even though you have a winning attack after that as well. So what if they take with a pawn? First off, most of your pawns won't, because, prior to you playing d4, they wanted to capitalize on this attack. So naturally they want to take with a piece and reopen the diagonal. But anyway, what if they capture with a pawn? Well, then you first just castle, and they'll do the same because they need to put their king to safety, otherwise rook e1 is coming. And here you play queen d3. I mean, there are actually different ways to attack here, but I like this one. Hitting the knight and forcing it to go back. If necessary, you can also play rook e1 and attack it twice, therefore the knight will have to go anyway. And here's the problem for black. You have really strong attacking position with a lot of attacking opportunities. Like you can play bishop g5 and capitalize on this pin, right? And your knight is active here. You can go knight g5, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can play rook e1 and take control of this file. You've got a lot of attacking ideas here, and your opponent is completely disorganized and defenseless. Knight g5 is a pretty strong move here. Actually, you want to trade off this knight somehow, or he takes here, and as soon as that happens, queen h7, boom, checkmate in 1. Therefore, this threat is real. We want to trade off the knight and then play queen takes h7. The only way to stop that would be to go g6. Then you can insist on the same idea and play queen h3. This time we hit the pawn from the other side, but the idea is still the same. Trade off the knight, queen h7 mate. If they play h5, if they're still smart and find a way to handle your threats, then you keep dancing with your queen and play queen to f3. This time we attack the knight and indirectly this pawn on f7. And after he trades, we'll just put this massive pressure, and again, you've got a winning attack. Like right now, we're hitting hard on this pawn on f7. We attack it twice, no, 3 times. Plus, we are actually putting pressure down there against the rook and the knight. And again, we can play rook e1 and also control this file. So your opponent is defenseless again. You have so many threats here. I'll show you one line which you don't have to remember, of course. It just goes to show you how fun a chess game can be. Let's say black goes king g7, somehow trying to get away from this x-ray from your bishop. You can play a mysterious move queen f4, and at first it doesn't seem to have any reason behind this move, but after that, after your opponent plays something, let's say queen e7 to cover this or whatever, all of a sudden you play knight h7, and you start the attack in Mikhail Tal style, where you sack pieces and just go for it. So knight h7 hits the rook, and after he captures it, here comes the point of having your queen not on f3 but on f4. Now we have this battery. And all of a sudden you sneak into the attack with queen h6 check, supported by the bishop. The king has to go. Now we use the power of this bishop and we play queen takes g6. The king has to go, but now it's completely exposed and you can win anyhow you want. For example, bishop g5, you can add the bishop to the attack, and on the next move after black plays whatever, we can play bishop f6 and then all kinds of checkmating threats on the next move and you win. Alright, we analyzed the most common way of black to play, and now let me address quickly a few what-ifs. So what if instead of the main move pawn a6, your pawn goes knight f6 right here? Well, you can still play knight to c3, defending this pawn, and it will likely transpose into the same stuff. If not, no worries, it's still a pretty standard position, you can play it easily. So let's go back, let's say they go a6 the main line, bishop a4. Here if they go b5 here, again nothing changes, you will go back and it will transpose into the same stuff. So knight f6 is the main move, we play knight c3, defend this pawn, and in most cases, again, they will actually play b5, because they worry that you can take the knight and then win the pawn on e5. I mean, it's not really all that dangerous for black, but your opponents will worry about this. If not, if they don't play b5 right here, you just castle and play standard chess, and again, it will likely go into something similar. After they go b5, you play bishop b3. What if they don't play bishop c5? It's the main move that they play, kind of by analogy with the Italian game, but if not, they also gotta watch over this knight g5 thing, right? Because it is actually quite similar to the Italian game, or the two knights game, right? I mean, you just have your bishop on c4, not on b3, usually, right? You develop it there in the two knights game, but it doesn't matter, we still hit this pawn. So if they are careless and let's say go d6, you can actually go for a knight g5 and black's already in trouble. So bishop c5 is what they play, and then you go pawn a4 and you undermine this pawn. They have to defend it somehow. If not, you're gonna take it. So if they play something, you take it and you just win material, right? This pawn is pinned. They can't recapture because they'll lose the rook, so they can't do it. Let's take it back. What if they take on a4? Well, that's good for you. You don't win the game right away, but after this recapture, they split up their pawns, they have pawn weaknesses, your bishop is now back to the active square, pressures the knight, and indirectly we pressure this pawn on e5. That's still pretty cool. So let's go back. After b4 and you go knight to d5, what if they don't fall for the main trap and don't take on e4? Well, in that case, they'll probably take here, which is still fine, because you don't have your active knight on d5 anymore, but then you'll have your active bishop. And again, your position is just objectively good. You're slightly better still, right? So no problem. Plus, you're also putting the pin right here, and it's quite easy for them to overlook the fact and, overlook knight takes c5 tactics in some lines. For example, if we just keep playing casual moves, they can easily overlook that you can take here and that the knight is pinned. And you still got a winning position after that. Therefore, even if your opponent plays something else, you're still perfectly fine, and quite often you can still win anyways. Of course, your opponent can play something completely unexpected and we can't cover everything. I have another free masterclass where I cover the right way of thinking so that you know how to find right moves yourself in any situation. If you're interested, I'll drop the link down below in the description and somewhere on the screen. Check it out and keep crushing it. Let me know if you have any questions and have fun.